Hi, welcome to the CRC Roundtable, our monthly virtual seminar series. Our intention has always been to create a unique conversation space that matches scientific advances and management needs. Just as a reminder, if you haven't been here before, the webinars are designed for contribution, not consumption, even though this is about eating blue catfish. But as a reflection of that intent, the panelists have been given about 25 minutes total to make some introductory remarks, allowing 30 minutes for discussion, which will be facilitated out of the chat and also from the questions that have been submitted beforehand. And this is all about us, giving us a place to ask the clumsy questions, to try and navigate through a space where the solutions are not always obvious. So welcome. So I usually start by talking about why this topic at this time and by these panelists, but we were going to start with a question, a little bit of a survey. And so have you, if you can answer it, it would really give our speakers some good information. Have you eaten blue catfish before? Oh, like this should be making you feel pretty good. So it looks like 55% have said yes, 41% no, but I do want to, and only 4% no, and I don't want to. So thank you for that. So let me talk about why the topic at this time, by these people. And so really it's a story of, we're trying to go along the storyline of how did this story of the blue catfish turn from happy fish, happy angler to invasive threat. One of the reasons is that after being introduced in the 1970s for recreational fishing, it's not only thrived, but proliferated to rather alarming levels. I think, and Bruce will talk a little bit about that. But in a study by USGS and DNR, they looked at blue catfish in the Patuxent, and they estimated that upward of 70,000 fish inhabited a 5-mile stretch of the river, which amounts to about 1,250 blue cats per acre, which is incredibly high. The reason that they've been invasive is that they're incredibly voracious, opportunistic predators. They daily consume about between 8 and 9% of their body weight. And as when they looked at the stomach contents of the fish in the USGS and DNR study, it was primarily white perch, American eel, gizzard shad, crabs, and other small fish. So the question really is, and I think before Thanksgiving is appropriate time to ask, can we eat our way to ecological balance? And it seems like we need a collaboration between an ecologist engaged in restoration and a marketing expert. And I think that's exactly what we have. Bruce Vogt brings a vast knowledge of ecosystem science and the coordinated regional efforts to tackle this invasive species. He's also a native of the bay and its waters, and as an added benefit, I hear he enjoys not only spending time outdoors, but he loves to cook. So this will be good roundtable for him. Mike Hutt brings a vast knowledge of innovative market-based approaches and works to promote Virginia's commercial fisheries for the benefit of watermen, the economy, and the environment via a whole portfolio of approaches. I'm assuming that if he doesn't like to cook, he likes to eat seafood. So let's explore how emerging commercial fisheries could turn this ecological challenge into an opportunity, and seeing if eating blue catfish might just be a tasty way to help save the bay. And so with that, each of our panelists have extensive experience. Each of them could fill an hour. I will try and gently remind them to keep their remarks to about 12 minutes a piece. And with that, I will turn the floor over to Bruce.
Just getting the screen up and sharing. So are you all able to see that now?
We are.
All right, great. Thanks, Denise, for that really nice intro. I like the way you set all that up. In fact, I do like to cook, and I've cooked plenty of catfish myself. I think my favorite recipe is catfish tacos. Throw them on the grill, season it a little bit, and then have a nice array of toppings to put on your catfish tacos. And I think I can vouch for Mike. He knows plenty of recipes, and he's also loves to cook. So I'll let
Love to
him talk
cook.
more
Love to
about
cook.
that later. We share that in common. We actually share the same birthday too, by the way.
Yeah.
So you guys are lucking out today. Wait, maybe. I don't know. Both Virgos, I think. So, anyway, I'll get into the discussion. Denise gave an intro, but I'm with the NOAA Chesapeake Bay office. I'm the ecosystem science manager here. I'm also currently the chair of the Sustainable Fisheries Goal Implementation Team under the Bay program, and have been chairing the invasive catfish work group. I think since it began, and I'll talk a little bit more about what the work group is and the types of things that we're working on in the rest of the presentation. Is the second slide up? I keep getting
Yes.
automatically muted too. Um, so just by way of background, Denise provides some of this. Um, Invasive catfish aren't new to the Bay, but they have spread. So they were introduced in the 1970s. I'm talking about blue catfish, specifically here as a sport fish option in Virginia tributaries, like the James River. They have since moved throughout the Bay, pretty much through the whole Bay and into the Bay tributaries in both Maryland and Virginia. I'm not sure there's a tributary that we know of that they haven't been detected yet. The population status across those tributaries is very different. So places like the James, they're very well established. You heard from Denise about some of the population estimates in the Patuxent. So in areas where they sort of moved into first, they've become well established. In areas where they're new, the populations are likely growing. Um, the way that they were sort of introduced is probably twofold. We think that people moved them around from place to place, and that's how they initially were able to, move from tributary to tributary. However, the unique aspect of this particular catfish is, I think, of most people when they think of catfish, think it's a freshwater species. Well, blue catfish are able to tolerate salinities up to 14 parts per thousand and even up to 17 parts per thousand for larger fish for short periods of time. So when we have situations in the bay where salinity drops due to high precipitation, high flow, these fish are able to move. And so think back to 2018, 2019 when we had a really wet year. Um, Most of the bay was at salinities that allowed these fish to move into those areas. So, when conditions are right, they can move and they're going to follow, they're going to look for new habitats, they're going to look for food sources. And so we also think that they're moving throughout the bay when those conditions are available to them. Um, they are, generalist predators, so they'll feed on whatever's around that they can get to. They become piscivorous or mostly eating fish by the time they're about 12 inches large. Um, that does include things like blue crabs, and I think Mike will get into some of the other things that they found in stomachs like oysters and clams. But point is, they're feeding on whatever's available to them. And they do require, at least larger ones, require a significant amount of energy and food intake. So there are concerns. When you have catfish eating a lot of blue crabs, it's raised concerns by the blue crab industry. What is the impact here? Like, how many crabs are we talking about? And is it sizable enough to impact, another really economically productive fishery like the blue crab fishery? They can get really big, grow over to 100 pounds. I think over 100 pounds is a record in Virginia. I think it's a little over 80 pounds in and Maryland. So these fish get very large, and they're also really high densities in some of these systems, like Denise mentioned in the Patuxent. There's also been really high densities recorded in the James River, and so the number of fish making up 75% of biomass in places like the James is kind of staggering. And what that means for the rest of the ecosystem is still something we're trying to fully quantify. But the concern is that they're impacting things like shad, herring, blue crab, and other fisheries that we care about and are trying to, sustain over the long term. And I should say that there's also been intersections with other fisheries. So one of the issues that has come up before is people were trying to target striped bass, but their nets were becoming full with blue catfish. And when that happens, the catfish were destroying the nets and causing problems for the striped bass fishery. So there's all these intersections that these catfish are having with other aspects of the fishing industry that we're dealing with as we try to work through the problem. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the invasive catfish work group that we established to address this issue. The invasive catfish work group was developed by the Sustainable Fisheries Goal Team, which is part of the Bay program. We have representatives from all the state management jurisdictions on that team. And in 2012, this issue was brought to our attention. And because of the issues I mentioned earlier, the decision was we've got to do something. Like, we don't know everything. So one, we need to come up with better science and information to help guide management. And we really want to understand what the impacts are. But we're concerned enough and we're already seeing problems. We need to take a more collective Bay-wide approach to this issue. And so we formed the Invasive Catfish Work Group. And they've been tasked with both sharing information, developing science priorities, coming up with strategies for how we can reduce populations and also mitigate spread to other parts of the Bay. That part may be a harder problem to solve since they're already around everywhere. So we've been taking a different sort of approach, and that is, how do we reduce populations to a level that we think we can have an ecological impact and provide a new economic opportunity through fishing. The group is really diverse. Of all the things I've worked with the Bay program, this team probably has the highest diversity in terms of like the sectors and the places where people work. We have everything from fishery managers at the state jurisdictions, fishery scientists from several institutions across the Bay. We have folks like Mike Hutt working on marketing and his counterpart in Maryland. We have seafood processors that are getting the fish from the watermen. We have the watermen themselves. We have recreational anglers. We have school programs that are looking at ways of getting these fish into school lunches and universities and things like that. We've even had chefs participate on the team before. So it's really interesting. It's like the whole supply chain of blue catfish and everyone who needs to be involved to really address this issue. And everyone's really passionate about it and comes with great ideas. And there's also a lot of debate about what are the right approaches. And so I think the work group has really helped facilitate the right conversations and helped us come up with some strategies that then the people on the work group are going out into their own networks and implementing on the ground. So a little bit more on what the Invasive Catfish Work Group has done so far. In 2020, we put together a management strategy, which highlighted our top priorities for addressing the issue. It included science priorities. It included some of the things that we needed to do from the management standpoint around developing more management-specific targets or objectives for the fishery. It also talked about the need to actually develop and expand the fishery to try to reduce populations. So I can provide a link to that in the chat, but that's available and has really been kind of our guiding document for the work group. We also updated our goal for that work group in 2024 that I'll talk about in a minute. And we've broken that work group up because of all those different sort of areas of expertise on the team and the need to sort of tackle different components of this issue. We've broken the work group up into a couple of small teams. That includes a recreational fishing and charter captains team, a policy team, a science management team, and a commercial fishing processing and marketing group. And the team has also worked on coordinating and identifying funding opportunities for some of the science that we need. And we've also worked through SNOAA funding opportunities like Saltonstall Kennedy and others to get support to advance the science as well as some of the marketing strategies, looking into things like consumer preferences and how do we take that information and develop better marketing strategies. And then I'd also say communication. We've really worked on trying to raise visibility of this issue and get more of this information in the hands of the public for their awareness. So the goal that we developed and that we've updated this past year is on the slide here. By 2029, develop management strategies to minimize the spread and ecological impacts of invasive catfishes in the Chesapeake Bay. The management strategies will use the best available science and consider the diverse interests of stakeholders, support ecosystem health, and increase public awareness. So it's only a couple of sentences, but there's a lot there, and it requires sort of balancing several interests because we all recognize that we want to reduce populations to have an ecological uplift. But we also recognize that there are active fisheries around recreational fishing and things that people want to sustain. And so we're trying to come up with a way to sort of balance all these different, stakeholder interests and better engage the public in the process. A little bit more on what the small teams that I mentioned before are doing. So we developed kind of work plans for each team and have highlighted some priorities. And if people are interested in sort of looking more specifically at those work plans, we can share those. But these are the highlights. So the recreational fishing and charter captains team is really interested in the trophy aspect of the fishery, at least in Virginia waters, and trying to ensure that there's still space for recreational fishing around this species. The policy team is looking at advocating for bills that increase the market for blue catfish, as well as addressing some of the inspection requirements that have been placed on seafood processors. I think Mike will get into more detail on this, but there was a shift several years ago to require new inspection requirements for these fish that mean that processors had to sort of re-outfit their operations. So catfish are really being treated more like livestock in terms of how they need to be processed and handled at that facility, which is much different from other fisheries. And so that meant they had to sort of invest in the types of technologies and requirements, as well as have a seafood inspector available on site to really process these fish. And that's created a bit of a bottleneck when it comes to trying to address our overall goal, which is to expand the fishery and get more fish to market. So policy folks are working on those issues. For science and management, we funded several studies to try to better understand the basic biology and some of the predation impacts. I think the charge now is we understand that each tributary is different. And so each tributary probably needs a bit of a different approach. And in some cases, we need to better understand what's happening in that particular tributary with respect to populations and where the fish are to really develop effective strategies to reduce the population sizes. So that's ongoing. USGS was mentioned before. They're helping invest in the types of science that we need to support those activities. And we need to sort of combine the science, what we're learning from the science, with the managers to come up with better tributary specific plans. And then lastly, we have the commercial fishing and processing and marketing. The big issue there is to really try to increase harvest. And I think that is showing signs of success. If I use the Potomac, for example, I think fishery landings there have gone up 500% since the mid 2000s or so, and since we've really started working on this. So landings, at least in one tributary, are going up, and I think that trend is similar across the region, but we still have room to grow. And so that's been a big focus of that group. And then, of course, you got to put if you're going to catch the fish, you got to get them to a processing facility, and then you have to get them to market. So we're really trying to figure out better ways of you know building capacity for processors to handle these fish, because it's different from other fish. You have to hand cut them, and there's just different things, including the inspection process I mentioned, that goes into it. And so, yeah, we're working on all those different avenues. I'm pausing here because I don't want to take away from Mike's talk later and get too much into the details. So yeah, that's kind of the background for where we are and what we're doing through the invasive catfish work group. And I'm happy to take questions later, and I'm going to hand it over to Mike. Thanks for your time.
All right. Thanks, Bruce and Mike.
All right.
Bruce, while Mike is getting his presentation up, I was surprised to hear that. Well, probably not surprised, but that you really have to have tributary specific information. And so I'm kind of wondering if you can think about, because I'm going to ask the question, where is the scientific understanding at a point that's that geographically specific, sufficient to inform kind of smart management? Or do we have catch up to do?
My take is we have agreed that a fishery is the strategy that we need to take, and we want to try to reduce populations. I think one of the issues is that, for example, we don't have a catfish monitoring program throughout the bay, and in Maryland, and Branson might be able to weigh in on this, but I still don't think there's like a specific catfish survey for the tributaries. And so we've kind of been piggybacking on data from other fishery surveys. It was also not until recently that like the Potomac River even started separating catfish out in their fishery landing data to even know what sort of the landings were like separate from other fisheries. And so I think we have some information to say we know what the strategy is, but we don't really know, for example, in a particular tributary, if we don't really know what the population size is, it's hard to know what our target would be for reducing the population to have the impacts we want. Great. So I think that's where it gets to, the more tributary specific. The other thing is, the fishing is different in each tributary. Some have a more robust recreational or charter sort of activity than others. The commercial fishing is different. So just having a better sense of all those different pieces in those places to try to make sure we can meet our goals. Great. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. And now, Mike, we'll give you your full time on the floor. We can see your presentation.
All right, Denise, thank you. And thanks for the introduction. And appreciate y'all given me the opportunity to present this today. As Denise said, I'm Mike Hutt, Executive Director of the Virginia Marine Products Board, promoted market seafood for the industry in Virginia. Virginia ranks first on the East Coast in seafood landings, third in the nation. Very valuable industry here in the Commonwealth. All right, so Bruce kind of gave introductions of this. I'm going to just really quick that, there's certainly a problem here. They grow to be 100 pounds, 2 to 5 feet in length. And with that, surviving and growing like they are, they're eating a lot of products out of the bay in the rivers and tributaries. They were introduced in the 70s and 80s. The apex predator, they consume 8 to 9% of the body weight a day, which is a lot to eat out of the Chesapeake Bay. I'll move on. This green in the center, little triangle, shows where they were turned loose in the 70s and 80s. And the map on the right in the brown shows a rough idea of where they've migrated and where they are today. They represent 75% of the biomass in the James, Rappahannock, New York rivers. In 2018, there was estimated 500 million pounds. Right now, this estimation of 700 million pounds, with them consuming on an average of 8.5% of the body weight a day. That's roughly 60 million pounds of other species, from crabs to shrimp to oysters to clams, and a big variety of fish that they're consuming. As Bruce mentioned, NOAA implemented a management plan in 2020. It's a good, healthy choice. They provide abundance of healthy omega-3 acids, and then especially EPA and DHA, which are not found in land-based plants and animal products. So that's a big plus on eating the fish there. Stomach content. This is something that has not been enough study done on this from my perspective, but in May, in Newport News 2024, that fish there had roughly 100, 150 baby clams in its belly. The one in the middle, March of 23, in Maryland, had 23 crabs in it stomach. And May 2024 in Newport News, there was a mixture of 200 baby oysters and clams in that, where we had not been seeing many of the baby oysters and clams in them up till then. I was in the seafood industry in the Northern Neck for 20 years and filleted and processed a lot of these catfish. I've seen 18-inch striped bass in their bellies. I've seen as many as 42 baby crabs, anywhere from a half inch up to 3.5 inch in the stomach of one. 6 or 8 white perch. I've seen white shad, hickory shad, many a herring, sometimes 6 or 8, 2 or 3 on it. And I contribute a lot of this predator of the decline in a lot of the fisheries that the state is managing and the federal government is, that's in the bay. Give you a quick idea. This is from a Virginia processor. In 2006, he was getting very few catfish come across his dock. It was more spot, gray croaker, menhaden. As in 2023, you'll see by the colored chart there, majority of what he's getting is probably 90% of catfish today. And it's not that he's not buying those other products. The watermen are not harvesting them. They're not there to harvest, A comprehensive Virginia Tech initiative we're working on with Virginia Tech ARAC in Hampton on harvesting. There's seine hauling, there's pot loop net hauling, there's electronic fishing, there's still pound netting going on, some haul seining and trot lining. So there's a variety of ways of catching those. We're working with Virginia Tech on an initiative of processing, doing automated and robotics, and it's very expensive. We do have some companies that are looking in to do that to get the demand that is there for club stores, restaurants, food services, and retail stores to fill that pipeline. The 4 processors in Virginia today are currently all cutting everything by hand, and I think everybody in Maryland is cutting by hand. But to fill that pipeline, there's going to have to be some other type of processing to be done. We lost a lot of processors when it went from FDA inspection to USDA inspection, and that certainly created a problem. It's the only fish that has to be inspected under USDA. Like Bruce said, they treat them as they do the beef industry and poultry industry and all. And it's certainly been a hindrance to the processes in the Chesapeake Bay region. Commercial industry, we're working with chefs, retail stores, seafood markets, and they're the ones going to have to lead the way in consumer demand to help control the population in Chesapeake Bay. It has increased in consumption, and it's one way to reduce the numbers of this invasive species. It's very high in calories, it's high in protein, and if I can get this to move, a 4-ounce serving has 90 calories, only 2% fat, 19 grams of protein. You're not going to find any other seafood item that has that. here in Chesapeake Bay that we're working. It's very high. It's a good choice. It's a healthy choice. There's companies right now working on some value-added products. Smoke is a dip. IQF, individual frozen in retail bags in club store packs where there is a demand and they want the product. We just got to get enough processors or get enough cutters to be able to fill that pipeline, because that's going to be huge. And we're on the verge of getting there, I think. And it's a lot of people working on that. Cooking methods. I do love to cook. That's my downtime. I probably cook at home at least 4 or 5 nights a week. My wife is a great cook, but I can go home after 12, 14-hour day or whatever, and that's my downtime. I love to cook. Cook a lot of catfish. We probably eat on average 2 to 3 times a week. You can grill it, pan sear it, blacken it, Cajun it, deep fry it. One of my favorite is my grandmother's black cast iron pan. Is put a little bit of my mix of seasons that I blend myself together and let it sit at room temperature for about a half an hour and pan sear it real quick in that black cast iron pan. And it's great, like Bruce said, in tacos, fish and chips. I mean, you can do so much with it, and it adheres to many applications of marinades and rubs, and it takes to it very well. We're taking an active role in promoting this. We're featuring at trade shows. We do 3 international trade shows a year. We have chefs there cooking. We prepare it, display it, cook it in a variety of ways for people who are interested in it. Some of the success from the Seafood Expo North America, which is in Boston every March, the last 2 years, we've sampled it, and we've had people that said no, that they can't serve catfish and don't like catfish. And one group in particular from New York, he and his wife were there. They have 7 restaurants, and convinced them to finally try it. They placed an order that day with the Virginia company who processes it, and they're still carrying it and using it in their 7 restaurants today. So it's convincing people that it's not the bottom feeding catfish. It's not a farm raised catfish. It adheres and takes to what it's feeding on. And who doesn't like blue crab, striped bass, white perch, herring, shad, clams, and oysters? So we're eating what it's eating, and it picks up that flavor and profile, which makes it different from the other species and types of catfish where they're grown and harvested. We're supporting different coalitions, some with grant money with Virginia Tech, Sustainable Food Systems, state and federal initiatives on that, and continuing to work with the Blue Catfish Working Group for marketing through VDACs. So we're doing that and sending samples out to a variety of restaurants, retail markets, food service chains, and all. To give you an idea, in 2019, Virginia harvested 1.98 million pounds. 2023, 3.11 million pounds. We hope that figure will be up for 24. It's too early to tell yet, but it's been a problem with having enough processors and companies to cut what's been available. But we're looking at that. VDACs, Virginia Department of Agricultural Consumer Services, is through Governor Youngkin's initiatives, the APHID program, the last 2 years has awarded $250,000 grant to 2 processors, Sea Farms in Virginia and Amory Seafood, to utilize it for flash freezing and other equipment to increase the volume of fish. And it's in the budget for next year also. So with that, I'm saying it's done a time. If you haven't eaten it and you haven't tried it, you need to do it. You need to try it. It's not like catfish you're probably used to eating and trying that most people sell, whether it's farm raised, imported, or whatever. And like I say, it's going to taste like what it's eating, and it's eating the same things we want to eat that we all enjoy and love. And with that, get to your local market, get to your local restaurant, look for it, ask for it, and put it in your mouth and let's try it. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you all. And when it comes time for question and answers, I'll try and answer any questions that you all have for me. And if I can't give you an answer today, you let me know, and contact information, I'll get it to you. Thanks again.
Mike, congratulations. I think you are the only person that could go from slides of fish gut contents to making it appetizing in 8 minutes.
Well,
Really.
I look at that in this way. If you eat with your eyes, you're not looking at that when you're eating. Yeah.
All right. Well, I have just to let people know, there's a tremendous amount of conversation and great ideas and connections being made in the chat, and we'll make sure that those are available for those of you that can't quite see them. But the first question is from Jeff Corbin, and this kind of wraps into a lot of things that have been going on in the chat. The question reads, I've seen several announcements in recent months of grant funds being provided to several seafood processing facilities in Virginia to expedite harvesting, processing, and distribution of blue cat meat. Given the fish consumption advisories in place in Virginia for blue catfish, what are the safeguards that end buyers of the processed product are consumed at levels protective of human health? So I think there's both an aspect to, who's got fish consumption advisories, what are they based on? Are they conservative? Kind of where are we in the balance between having people eat it and making sure we're being protective of human health? So Mike, maybe I'll let you answer that question first, and then Bruce can tag on.
Yeah, well, when the process really kicked off and started going in this, and more companies in Maryland, Virginia started processing before we went to USDA, they looked at this advisory and they looked at it as in consumption of fish that were 30, 32 inches and above. And just on a voluntary basis, most of the companies, and I have not checked with them in the last 30 days, were hearing to stay away from fish that were like 30, 32 inches and above for processing. Some of them set the limit at 28. They were not going to buy anything over 28 inches. And that's what they told the watermen. Watermen want to sell everything they harvest and catch. And, a big fish weighs more, that's more per fish. But majority of them that I've been talking to and have been there and looked at what they're processing and harvesting, it was fish under the 32-inch range. And I'm not going to say some might not get cut at times, but, you look at that advisory on catfish, you look at other seafood that's got advisories on it also, from tuna to swordfish and other species. You can go on and on. There's advisories for about everything there. And the same thing with beef and poultry and stuff is advisories. So I think it's a lot of responsibility to the consumer to be careful and be aware of what they're buying and where it comes from and what it is. But like I say, most of the processing I've seen done, they're staying away from that bigger fish. And I think it's more or less in the belly content. As of right now, the companies here in Virginia are not doing anything with the belly flap on it. Okay. They're taking a clear, straight cut of fillet, which is body meat, that these levels, from what I understand, are more or less in the belly content of the fish. So right now, that's going into the scrap. And just to hear on that, that's it's not what's coming out in the fillet.
Bruce, do you have anything to add to that?
He covered it well. I mean, just, there have been some outreach efforts to some materials and things distributed to folks to more like recreational fishers and things for how you actually prepare the catfish and fillet it to try to avoid those more hot spots that Mike mentioned with the belly and the size ranges that should not be eaten. I think both Matt and Margie also either referenced or provided links to the advisories that are available through Maryland and Virginia. So yeah, I don't think it's something we definitely recognize and have talked about as a concern, and we want to make sure people have the information they need to make the smart choices. And there's other efforts, to try to reduce the contaminants that are making their way into the market through the processing avenues that Mike mentioned. So, yeah.
Great. Okay, now there's another question about really how feasible. Well, how do we know? So it's difficult to change perceptions on food. How are we measuring the efficacy of this approach? And could we really eat our way to ecological balance? I mean, so it's a management strategy of yours, Bruce, and I'm sure Mike, you're probably monitoring, how well you're doing with changing actual perceptions and behavior. So maybe Bruce, I'll ask you if you have a response to that first, and then Mike can follow up on this one.
I think a big push has been better public awareness, and the efforts that Mike has taken and Matt Scales and others to sort of get out there and introduce people to the product. And once they get people to try it, they usually get people hooked. So a big, when we first started talking about this, I don't think many people were even aware that catfish, were here or an issue. And now I think the visibility has been raised. We've held events with chefs and things to sort of show how the different ways are to prepare them. So a big thing has been raising the visibility and awareness that this product is available to consumers. There have been some studies that VIMS and others have done trying to understand people's taste preferences for this particular fish, just to put a little more, I guess, science and social science behind it. Like, what level of information do people want to hear about this fish to be more willing to try it? There's been work through, I'm forgetting now if it's Monterey Bay Aquarium and things, but this is a certified fish as sustainable and green. So, things like that. I think when you go to Whole Foods, you see that little green sign next to it. So those types of efforts, I think, are leading to better awareness, and I hope will lead to a better market in the future.
So how, Mike, like how much juice do you think you can get out of the squeeze of increasing consumption, and how do you sort of monitor and measure the efficacy of what you're doing, at least in Virginia?
Well, I mean, we carry it to trade shows, inbound trade missions. We have buyers come in. We're featuring it on social media and pushing it there. Is education. Educate. People don't know about it. They're just thinking about the word catfish. They're not thinking about the benefits of this catfish, the healthy choice, what it's eating, the flavors, the profiles. We're introducing it to more grocery store chains, restaurants, retail markets. And just take, for instance, we have here in Virginia, along from Richmond to North Carolina, it's called Shrimp Shack, SKRIMP Shack. I introduced it to them. He was seeing some articles through Seafood Source and other places that what we were trying to do, and carried samples. We did cookings and cutting and tastings in his restaurant. He's put it on the menu. It was like 23 different stores that this guy buys for. He's still got it in some of them now. This time of the year seasonal, they're pushing some other things. And he's going to put another big push on it in the spring. So it's people like that that help be the forerunners in it. And some retail seafood markets here in Virginia that didn't used to do anything but farm raised or imported have now made it a big part of their business, where, some days they're selling 100 to 200 pounds of fillets. They're putting it on the menus, small independent restaurants. And it's educating the people about it and have them go and look for it and ask for it. And that's one way of driving it. If this is something that you want in your local market or restaurant or food service distributor, if you're a chef or manage a restaurant or whatever, they're not offering it to you. Ask for it. And consumer driven, I call it in the back door, that will help drive it and increase demand for it. It's certainly a good product. When I was in the seafood business in Northern Neck, I opened in 1979. The warden approached me that we got a problem. We got to get rid of these catfish. There's no market for it. We sell a few here and there. So I started buying some and filleting it, putting in my retail case. I had a small restaurant in there. When I sold that place 20 years later, it was the best selling fish that I had retail in a small restaurant for a little seafood lunch platter and a fish sandwich. And I mean, in the fall of the year before we took pound nets up, I probably would fillet 15 or 20,000 pounds of them and freeze it to have it carry me through the winter there then, where it's a year-round fishery now. But these guys were pound net, and they had to take the pound nets up when cold weather hit, didn't want ice to get them, lose the nets in the poles. But I'm telling you, it's a great product. And if it would hurt you, I don't think I'd be here today. Because I've eaten since the 70s and 80s and 90s, and even now, it's a great fish. It adheres to many rubs, spices, marinades. It's just about educating the people and getting the consumers over that hurdle of perception of catfish that's been here for years, and we're making headway with it. We've got a lot of club stores right now. If the pipeline can be filled in 3 pound, 5 pound bags interested in it, we've got some grocery store chains that wanted IQF in pound to 2 pound bags. We've got to be able to fill that pipeline, and that's where processing comes in.
Mike, and talking about that brings up another question that's in the chat, and I got the impression that you're trying to increase consumer demand, but you've also got a significant bottleneck in processing. And there's a question in the chat: what was the reason for the change from FDA to USDA processing regulation? Maryland's petition for federal emergency relief funding was denied. Are there any ongoing efforts to get the federal government to help by relaxing processing rules or returning to FDA? Or is there something else that will help address the processing bottleneck? And maybe how is the processing bottleneck relative to, you're wanting to increase consumer demand?
Well, first of all, this came upon from FDA to USDA. It's a political issue. The Gulf region farm-raised industry went to Senator Cochran at the time and got to put a bill introduced to combat the imported swai and bassa and imported what they call catfish, because they were in competition with it. They couldn't compete with it. And in that processing that he put in a bill and it passed, they did not eliminate the word wild that had to be USDA inspected. So we got swept in under the bus on that rule. A coalition started about 8 years ago to get it changed. They hired a lobbyist and the people from North Carolina, from Louisiana, some other areas of the Gulf, Virginia and Maryland, that processed these wild blue catfish. Hired a lobbyist, went to DC, lobbied to try and get it changed back to FDA. Senator Cochran's statement at the time is, don't want to hear it, don't bring it here, it's a done deal. Now, that coalition went back to the farm-raised industry in the Gulf, and I was on some of those calls, and they said they didn't do it to harm it, didn't do it to hurt us, but it was here, and the reaction was, if you didn't do it to hurt the wild industry here in the U.S., you all had Cochran put it in, he was still in office at the time, is go back and ask him to rewrite that and get that word wild taken out of it where it doesn't impact this. And there was no success, no luck there. I think they realize that, we're in the catfish business now. It's going to grow. We've got more processors, more people starting to look at to get certified. And if we get some of this automated machinery, which is very expensive, I'm not saying that it's going to happen because it is very, very expensive. One of those pipelines could be $1 million plus to do it. So it's, that's how they do automated machinery in the Gulf. They're taking a live fish, bringing it in live. They can control the size of it. These machines, you can probably set 2 different gaps to do 2 different size fish. A lot of our fish, rigor mortis is set in it by the time they get to the processor. And the machines that they have that do farm raised with will not cut fish once rigor mortis is set in it. So they're looking at doing that. And if that does happen and gets going, that's when you can entertain and move masses about, just not to club stores, national grocery stores and restaurants, but also food banks, institutions, hospitals, you know, prison
Mhm.
systems, where you can fill a pipeline and have fish to do it. And it's going to happen. It's just going to be a matter of time, I think.
Yeah. Thank you. And so maybe let me move to Bruce and ask you a question. How, in your, it might be a long way off, but how impactful and large of a management strategy for blue catfish can this be? And, ultimately, also, can you entertain a little bit? What do we think the challenge is going to change with climate impacts?
Yeah, for the first one, I mean, Branson and Margie might want to weigh in a little bit. I mean, both Maryland and Virginia are working on fishery management plans. Maryland actually has one in place, and I think Virginia's is developing. So there will be certain jurisdiction specific fishery management plans that are put together. I think Branson mentioned it in the chat, and I mentioned it earlier. One of the things we want to do is ensure that we have the information we need to sort of figure out what management targets we have. You know, how much do we need to reduce populations to help the ecosystem, as well as sustain a fishery. I think one of the interesting issues here is this is a bit different from the way that a lot of invasive species are handled. Typically, the effort is you try to eradicate or get rid of the problem, like we did with nutria years ago here, and that's not the approach that we're taking here. It's sort of being viewed as a problem, but also an opportunity. And so, how do we kind of balance both of those things? And I think management will make some decisions around how they want to do that through fishery management planning. So I want to be careful not to get into their turf, but that's kind of at a high level. Um, as far as climate change, uh, I would say generally climate change will probably be advantageous to this fish. If we look at just bigger picture climate projections, although we're in a drought year, the climate projection is more for higher precipitation events and wetter conditions, which, as I mentioned, sort of would allow for movement of these fish more within the bay, expand their habitat availability at times. I don't think, maybe someone could correct me, I don't think rising temperatures are going to be a major influence on them, given their home range. Um, and it might mean that they could expand, beyond the Chesapeake into Delaware and other places. So I think there might be some work on that in the future around what does climate change mean for the potential expansion of these into other estuaries.
Denise, can I iterate one thing there on this, but the management plan? At the time, Virginia Marine Resources Commission right now, I talked to Commissioner Eam again yesterday, and catfish is certainly a hot topic through Virginia and Maryland here now. There's no limit on what you can catch, and it's the one species that's really available here in Virginia waters in Chesapeake Bay and in Maryland. They will issue a license. There's no restriction on that. I mean, like crabbing, you have to buy someone's license. Striped bass, you have to buy that. You can go to VMRC if you've got a commercial card and get a license to harvest catfish. It's open year round, no limits, catch what you can sell, whatever. So, from that manager's standpoint of view of it, we're nowhere near reducing the numbers to where it's not going to be a sustainable fishery. The rough estimated that it's 700 million pounds or plus in the Chesapeake Bay. And we're not taking but a small percentage of that. But all the other fisheries that the state and federal government manage that I've seen in my 40 some years in this industry, like crabs, striped bass, shad, herring, moratoriums on them, a little bit of bycatch limit, whatever. All the management they've done, from sanctuaries, no dredging season, limits on straight bass, the number of size, hours you can crab, the number of bushels you can crab, the number of pots you can fish. This one species is the thing that's increased in population. And with all the work that the state and federal agencies done, which is needed, and I support that, this is the one thing that we've seen change in 40 some years that's causing havoc on this ecosystem. And that's my belief in it until somebody can prove that wrong or different, and that's just my opinion and the things that I've seen from the federal and state government managers, which do a great job. We've got a problem. The gates open, the cows out. What are we going to do? We got to put them on the plates and we got to eat them.
That's a great, and I'm going to ask you, I have 2 minutes left, and I want to thank everyone who's put so much information in the chat. That's a really valuable resource, and we'll make sure that that's in the notes that are sent out after that Lauren follows up these with. But I would just like to take the last 2 minutes, and I'll give the opportunity to you. First, Bruce, take a minute, and what is it that you'd really want people to carry home about blue catfish after this hour?
Yeah, I think I'll repeat some of the things we said. I think there's an opportunity here. The introductions have happened, and now we're trying to address the consequences. And we have an opportunity to provide a new economic driver for the region through developing the fishery and the processing capacity in the market. And we could do that in a way that also helps restore some of the ecosystem services or just the health of the ecosystem that may have been lost with their introduction, but also help, provide some other economic incentives for the communities that rely on seafood production from the bay. So I think that's the key thing. And then just continuing to get the message out like you're doing here, so we can get more people eating them to sustain that market.
Okay, and Mike, you get the final word.
Well, I think like Bruce said, it's educating the people on it and get it in the mouths and have them eat it. It's going to be another driving force that with seafood being such a strong industry here in Virginia and even in Maryland, but particularly in Virginia here, with us ranking third in the nation, this is something that you can get a license, you can catch it. The processing, I think, is going to come. We'll get over that hurdle. But the economic factor of this, from the beginning of the harvest to the water, with them buying boats, fuel, gear, trucking it to processors, from refrigeration equipment, packaging, distribution to food service, retail. It's a big chain here that supports a lot of jobs and people in the industry, and then through it to Commonwealth and in Maryland, that it's valuable. And think that what you do, if you can enjoy this fish and you eat it, you can get over that hurdle or perception of what catfish is, what you'd be doing to help the bay and the tributaries with other species that we all enjoy to eat, and to help the economy here in Virginia and in Maryland. I'm not going to leave them out of it because that's a big part of it. We have a lot of guys that sell fish to processors in Maryland. So I can say just go look for it, ask for it. And if you've got any questions, y'all got my contact information. I'll be glad to answer or work with you any way I can to provide any information that'd be helpful in it. And thanks for this opportunity. There's more things like this need to be done to educate and get the word out. And thank you again.
And you and Bruce are welcome to host a fish fry anytime, and we'll all show up. So
I'm gonna have it at my house tonight.
Thank you both. Thank everyone who attended, and we look forward to seeing you next month for the CRC Roundtable. Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Mike. That was wonderful.
Thank you all.